Hello, and welcome to A More Intelligent Tomorrow. A wide-ranging exploration of the potential impact of AI on the world around us, as envisioned by the future heroes of the human and machine intelligence revolution. How fast will AI drive disruption in auto sales? We'll discuss this and more with Tyler Hall on today's episode. And now, your host, Ben Taylor.
Okay, Tyler, thanks for being here. Thanks for making time for us.
I'm excited, Ben.
I really want to kind of go back to the beginning because a lot of the people that are listening, they may want to go do a startup and they may want to try to follow in your shoes and make some of the decisions you made. So what's the backstory for you?
I'm a 20-year-old kid. I'm going to school in Salt Lake City, Utah. All the craziest things you can do, I'm doing, right? School full-time, job full-time, newly engaged, like broke as a joke. And I'm making like nothing at my day job, right? So I'm struggling to get by. And I saved up enough money to buy my first car. I buy my car. It's a big day. I'm super excited. But my job all day, every day was to sell digital advertising on KSL.com, which is a classifieds in Utah. And so I'm at work the next day and I realize that the car that I had bought was worth quite a bit more money than I paid for it. And so what did I do? I listed it. And within about a week, I turned around and I sold it. And I made $3,000.
Wow. That's a big gap. And for a college kid, that's a ridiculous gap.
It was so much money. Like, I was rich, right, at this time. That it took me months to make $3,000 in my day job. And in a couple of days, I made $3,000. And so I didn't think a whole lot of it. I decided, you know what, I'm going to go out and I need another car. I need transportation. So I bought a car. I'm at work the next day. I get curious. I list it. I sell it. I make $1,000. So over the next 90 days, Ben, I had bought and sold like 20 cars. And I'm at the DMV one day, and this nice old lady who I worked with almost every time I was in there is like, "Hey, Tyler, do you have a dealer license that you want to put on file?" I'm like, "No." She's like, "Do you have a wholesale license? Are you a broker? Like, do you have any credentials?" I'm like, "No. Why?" She's like, "Well, according to my records, you've bought and sold about 20 cars in the last 90 days, and that's illegal. In the state of Utah, you can only register 3 in a calendar year."
So not only was that illegal, but it's a huge miss. So she should have caught you on the 4th, right?
Huge miss. I'm thinking like, no big deal. Like, what do I need to do? Pay a fine? Like, I'm balling. Like, I got all this money now, right? You want me to pay a fine? And she goes, "No, actually, this is like a whatever, class B misdemeanor. Like, you could go to jail." And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm a 20-year-old kid. I'm just hustling, making money. She gives me this packet. It's like this thick. And it's, information about how to become a dealer. And I go through it, and pretty quickly I'm like, I'm not a car dealer. Like, I'm a full-time student. Like, car dealers are kind of gross. Like, that's not what I want to do. And so I hang it up. But like a week goes by, and I had like lost the excitement of buying and selling cars. And so I figured out a loophole. And the loophole was, if I partnered with another dealer and used their dealer license number, I could continue to flip cars, but now I would just have to charge sales tax. And so I made it very clear over the next 9 months or so, I essentially built an API into KSL's platform where I could set the criteria on my end, and anytime a car matched that criteria, it would send a text message to my phone. And so I had automated searching for the cars, which was 90% of the work in buying and selling cars. Over the next year and a half, I bought and sold like 150 cars. Literally every other day I was flipping a car. And I ended up licensing that software to a bunch of small independent car dealerships. And in doing that, Ben, the reason why this story is important is because every time I sat in front of a dealer and I said, "Hey, I have a solution that's going to help you buy better used car inventory faster," every single time they listened to me. So I knew that this was like a big problem, right? And most of them bought my solution. So as a young guy, I ended up making a little bit of money. I didn't know how to invest it, but I knew a lot about the car business. And so I invested in a car dealership. I was involved in that for about 3.5 years. I got to know the day-to-day operations really well. And I knew there was this big problem, which was this inventory problem. But I knew I was also kind of dumb, and I didn't know how to build a company. And so I had an advisor say, "Hey, you should go and get some experience." And that led to me joining a startup called Domo that went on to IPO, and then joining a startup called HireVue that obviously exited for over $500 million. And so that experience really helped me become the founder that I am today.
So listening to you talk, I'm never going to think about car dealer the same way again, because I love the idea of like the misdemeanor. So it's almost like you being a car dealer is extra shady because you've got cars in your pocket somehow. Or we're going to meet at night and you're going to sell me some Escalade. Obviously, people are already using a lot of machine learning in this space, right? Like, are you coming into a busy vertical?
There's 70,000 car dealerships in the U.S. alone. 20% of them or so do not use a financial system to track their financials.
So they don't even save their data?
No.
Okay, so I'm expecting this, and you're actually saying, they're down here an F rating when it comes to data quality.
Yeah, right. And it's and these are mostly the small mom and pops, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's this problem. We've identified it. We know it's real. But frankly, Ben, I had no idea how to solve it. And so through my network, I started having a number of conversations. I ended up bringing on, right out of the gate when we transitioned Drivably, first of all, we had this massive customer contract that wasn't signed yet, but it was right there. And we had to scale up the business really fast to support that. It was well into the six-figure contract, like day one out of the gate, right? And so we staffed up our team. At the time, I think we had 12 or 13 people full-time, which in a startup, in its first week or 2 weeks, is massive, right? It was huge. Had this big deal, hired all these people, deal falls through, literally have to let go the entire team, right? I've convinced a bunch of people to come and believe in me. And we had to let go, 7 people when that deal fell through. And so we were then on to, not worrying about necessarily customers and revenue. And it was all about, okay, now we have this startup. We don't have a lot of cash in the bank. We're leaning out the team. And so 7 months into our business, Ben, we scrapped the entire initial product.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make. And one of the darkest days of my life was deciding to do that because we had spent lots of time and lots of money and energy in building this. And now we're starting back from zero.
How do you come into work tomorrow after you go through something like that?
I don't get too high generally emotionally, and I don't get too low emotionally. I try to stay pretty even keel. And I try to keep my sights on the long-term focus, right? Especially in making decisions like firing employees. The way that I view that, Ben, is as horrible of a thing as it is, because it is horrible and you're impacting people's lives. And these are people, by the way, that are like your family. Like you spend way more time with these people than you do your wife and your kids. And so it's extremely difficult, right, having those conversations. But the way I view it is as a way to protect the rest of the organization.
But the employees that are being let go, they don't see it that way, right? Because the employees that are being let go, they don't see it from the founder perspective. They don't see you had no other choice. They don't see that it's not an insult to them.
It's never expected when you let somebody go. And it's difficult to have those conversations. But look, investors have entrusted me with their money. Other employees have entrusted me with the ride of a lifetime, basically, right? And I have to protect those things, and that comes first. And so while it's hard, keeping my sights on that focus is how I get through it.
Getting back to the machine learning, so first you have to build out a product, you have to get the data. It sounds like there are a few missteps where you had to, and that's very common with the startup. You think this is happening, it doesn't happen, you get more information, you have to pivot. Once you finally get the data, maybe explain that from getting the data and going to getting a model that's ready to review with a customer. Where does the talent come from? Where does the data come from? What are the timescales dealing with that?
The start of this process starts with, we had some investors encourage us to go out and get what we call design partners. Okay, so we were not a revenue generating business at this time. We had already taken on about 1.5 million of capital. We can get back to the fundraising efforts because I think they're fascinating and some really good learnings in that as well. But we had raised about $1.5 million in venture funding, and we were still pre-revenue. And we had some investors and advisors encourage us to go and get what's called design partners, which are essentially paying customers that are helping you with R&D.
Mm-hmm.
right? So the mutual benefit to that is you're creating something for them that's going to create value for their business. And in turn, they're giving us an unfair share of their time and energy and resources to help us build and test new products. Okay. So my co-founder and I went out and we signed up a couple of design partners. We had discussions with about 10 big groups in the US. Essentially what we sold them was, hey, we are a data science company. Okay, this is, by the way, before we had a data scientist. Okay, we are a data science company that specializes in collecting lots of information in your market, including your historical sales data, and pairing that together to precisely help you understand what cars to buy, how much to pay, and where to buy them from to optimize for profitability and run a better business, right? And they believed us. They said,
Mm-hmm.
that sounds amazing, right? It's similar to what CarMax does internally, but that nobody else has commercialized and helped other dealers do.
Why are they believing you? You weren't promising them an R value. You weren't talking about AUCs. You weren't showing them scatter plots. You had an advantage because you already understood their problem from their shoes. And everything you just said has nothing to do with traditional statistics. You're speaking KPIs that they know. And so I think that probably built huge confidence with them. You know the problem, and you weren't confusing.
Yeah.
AI has to be mapped to value, and everything you just described was product to value with AI somewhere in the middle, but it's not really the center of the story. It's kind of it's a tool in the background. So yeah, keep going.
We ended up engaging with a guy who was a really talented BI architect and data science guy that had been in the industry for about 10 years. And we convinced him to come and help us with this deal.
Okay.
And so he got on the call. Their chief risk officer, who is a highly intellectual man, I'll just leave it at that, and always the smartest guy in the room, was on the phone, or excuse me, was in the call. And so we had our data science subject matter expert on the call as well, who was also very, very technical. And so it did get to a point in the conversation where, great, I understand the value that you guys are creating. Help us understand how you do it. We have our own data science team internally. We think that this is potentially something that we can build ourselves. We want to know that what you're going to build is going to be substantially different or something that we're just simply not capable of doing, right? Mm-hmm. And so Paul on our side did an amazing job in that meeting of speaking directly to their technical folks. And we probably spent 30 minutes to an hour is all in a total of 6 hours, getting really, really deep and technical. But without him, I'm not confident that we got that deal. We needed him to be on that call.
So you kind of see my spidey sense going off, like, how did this deal happen? Like, especially with AI, because normally you kind of have to bring some heavyweight, and sometimes you do a lot of posturing with that. So,
yep.
So you do the deal, you get the data. How long does it take to go from data to a model that you're willing to share? What are the timescales? What's that part of it look like?
So we asked them to sign a 12-month agreement with a 6-month cliff, essentially. Okay, so they're going to have 6 months where during that time, it's going to be data collection. It's going to be essentially the first iteration of a model that we're going to build. And by the end of 6 months, we are going to have a live model deployed inside of their business. If they are confident in that live model and some of the early results that we have gleaned from that model, then they will opt into the next 6 months of the contract, was essentially live testing inside of their environment and continuing to validate and refine the model that we built, right? And so luckily they did that. We pulled it off in the first 6 months. We're now in the second 6 months of that. We're testing it. It's producing amazing results. And at the end of 12 months, we'll have a conversation about, potentially a multi-year deal at the end of this thing. So
you recently raised some new money from a sports car company. You don't have to mention the name. Is that
a large German manufacturer, arguably the number one manufacturer of sports cars and supercars, I would argue, in the world, recently invested in Drivably, and we're extremely excited to have them on board. They've been great partners up to this point already. We are going to be launching a national pilot with them as well, which they have about, it'll probably be somewhere between 50 and 100 rooftops that we deploy this in. And so, excited to have their backing, excited to have their name, their connections, and everything that they bring to the partnership.
That's awesome.
I do believe that the cycle time would have been significantly shorter if we ended up partnering with somebody like you guys. So I'm actually not going to close the door on that. I still think there's real opportunity for us to do something together. But obviously, as you grow and as you continue to raise subsequent rounds of financing, investors a lot of times like to see that at least you have a team internally that's working directly with a firm like DataRobot to build your technology. So,
for any of the listeners you want to speak to, what do you want to say to them now about talent or opportunities to come reach out to you?
Yeah, I mean, Drivably, thanks, Ben, for giving me the opportunity. Drivably is, in my opinion, has to be one of the most exciting companies at our stage, meaning between the seed and the Series A. We recently, just to give you an update, right, we're coming out of a global pandemic, and amid all of that calamity, we recently acquired a Canadian-based company, software company. During that acquisition, for the last 2.5 weeks, we've been selling their product. We have quadrupled our monthly recurring revenue. Not going to talk about specifics, but well into the six figures that will allow us to raise a giant Series A early next year. And we're obviously looking for the best of the best, right? And one of our biggest needs right now is we need to hire a head of data science. And so we've got a great data science team that's taken us this far. It's time for a new leader to come in who's going to help us prepare for our next stage of growth. And again, I think Drivably is the place to be. We're going to raise a giant round. I think our likelihood of success, right? A lot of companies at this stage, they're unsure of their likelihood of success, and I've had that in the past for the first year of doing the company. I'm as certain now as I've ever been in our likelihood of a giant outcome, whether that be an IPO in 5 to 10 years or whether that be an acquisition. It feels more inevitable today than it ever has. And so we need a top tier head of data science. We want somebody that's scrappy. We want somebody that wants to do a startup. And so bring it on. We'd love to talk to anybody who's interested.
Awesome.
Yep. Now, I will say for non-technical founders like myself, you have to be dangerous, right? You have to understand enough about that world, but it's really not your responsibility to feel like you have to know it as well as your data science team, or you have to be writing lines of code. It's not practical. It's not realistic, but you got to know a little bit, right? Because you're going to get asked questions.
Well, if I found out you were writing code, I'd short your startup. Not because I think you would be bad at coding, but I would think you were very distracted from your roles and responsibilities. So right. Thanks, Tyler. It's been a pleasure. So good to catch up and hear what you guys are working on. I'm super bullish on you guys. I'm expecting to hear great news.
Thanks, man. It's awesome.